Hello, welcome to the 123rd annual meeting of the Audubon Society of Rhode Island. I'm Lawrence Staff, the Executive Director. The annual meeting is typically the occasion when Audubon members gather together to hear about our accomplishments of the previous year and plans for the future. It's also a time when we elect new board members to serve as trustees of the organization and recognize volunteers and partners who've helped us with our mission along the way. Last year at this time, nearly 150 members and their guests gathered at the Rosecliff Mansion in Newport for our annual meeting. Today, here we are, looking at a screen in order to practice responsible social distancing. Today's meeting content was pre-recorded over the past few weeks to ensure that it all comes together as smoothly as possible. I'd like to thank members of the Audubon staff for being so adaptive for this new way of working in order to keep Audubon's mission moving ahead and ready for the day when we have this crisis behind us. Thank you to our board of directors and our members for your continued trust in us, as well as for your support, guidance, and strength through all of this. As you know, last March, Audubon had to close the center and other offices due to COVID. In July, the center reopened, but on a reduced schedule. Thankfully, we never had to close our trail system at our 15 refuges around the state. Last spring, we saw a huge increase in the numbers of people who hiked our trails. People from all walks of life took advantage of our trail system to gut outdoors, exercise, and just be safe in nature. I invited a few people to share how important local Audubon refuges had been to their sense of peace during this pandemic.
Hi, I'm Ann Gould, and this is my husband Craig, and we live in Cranston, Rhode Island.
Amy Anderson, I'm from Riverside, Rhode Island.
I'm Jordan Ramos. I'm from Bristol, Rhode Island.
I'm Liza. I'm from Riverside, Rhode Island.
My name is Anita Keston.
My name is Jerry Elmer. I live in Providence.
We like the Audubon trails because we think it's really important during this very stressful time to be outside and with nature. It really helps you.
We are appreciative that there's a place like this that we can come to.
We've always gone for hikes, and the Audubon was great in staying open during some of this, especially during the earlier part of the pandemic. Some other trails were closed actually, and some of the local parks and things like that, but we've always been able to get to the Audubon, and it's helped our sanity.
And it's great to be out here during hunting season.
Because you guys don't let hunters.
I have appreciated the opportunity during the pandemic to have Audubon Society refuges to walk in outdoors. I get to appreciate nature in a way that is responsible and socially distanced from other people. It has been a good opportunity in a difficult time.
I've really enjoyed the opportunity during the pandemic to walk in Caratunk with my husband. It's been a real bright spot in our week. The nature is magnificent. I particularly love the purple flowers at the end of the walk. They always make me smile.
I do think it is a really calming retreat to go away to during this time of the pandemic.
We appreciate everything you do.
As you can see, our refuge system was very important during the early stages of the pandemic. Now I'd like to introduce Owen Helene, the president of the Board of Audubon, to say a few words.
Thanks, Larry. I'm Owen Helene, the chair of the board of the Audubon Society of Rhode Island. Thank you for joining us at an Audubon annual meeting like no other. This has been a year of overwhelming change. The COVID-19 pandemic, economic stress, the struggle for racial justice, hyperpolarized politics, and the threat of global warming. We face so many challenges that it's hard at times to understand the scale of the changes that will affect our future, and harder still to understand how to take action. For many, the choice is to hunker down and wait for it to all blow over. But the reality is, many of the changes we face today won't blow over, and action is needed. I'm happy to be with you today to tell you a little bit about the actions and changes, big and small, that Audubon has made to build a stronger, more resilient organization during these difficult times. First, I'd like to recognize all the staff for their creativity and adaptability, as we're required to change so much about how we interact with the public. From a virtual party for the peregrines, to socially distanced raptor events, family programs, and bird walks, to education and school programs delivered via Zoom. Audubon's staff has been inventive about how we deliver programming to support teachers and the community. Audubon's refuges and trails are seeing more visitors than ever before as people rely on getting outside as a way of staying healthy physically and psychologically. With the help of generous donors and a forgivable loan from the Federal Payroll Protection Program, Audubon's in very good fiscal shape. I appreciate this because I know that the future of many organizations looks precarious. Late last year, we closed our Invincible Audubon campaign, exceeding our $6 million goal to support our conservation, education, and advocacy efforts. Audubon continues to look toward the future. A few months ago, we concluded work on a new strategic plan to guide the organization for the next 5 years. You'll hear more about the strategic plan from Larry in a little while, but I want to thank all the citizens, colleagues, and community leaders who were interviewed in the process of developing the plan, and all of the Audubon staff who contributed their ideas, creativity, and leadership. The plan focuses Audubon's efforts on responding to the crisis of climate change and building a diverse, inclusive organization. The new strategic plan is our commitment to our members and to the community. It calls on us to practice what we preach as we become a greener organization, manage the nearly 10,000 acres of conserved habitat, and collaborate with organizations to develop models of environmental resilience. It calls on us to inspire you to learn and to act. Our education programs, our advocacy, and our communications will inspire you to learn about and take action on the climate crisis. Working with our partners in the environmental community will mobilize our collective power to take action for the environment. The Audubon Society of Rhode Island was founded in 1897. A lot has happened since then, but I'm happy to report that we remain a dynamic, resilient organization. One of the biggest sources of Audubon's energy is our board of directors. I'd like to recognize 4 members who are cycling off this year: Cindy Warren, Peter Lyle, Peter Payton, and Nate Chase. And I'd like to remember the 5th member who passed away earlier this year, Bob Berkelhammer. And I'd like to thank you, the members. You make this organization what it is today. You'll make it what it will be tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to introduce Don Heitzman, the chairman of Audubon's Governance Committee, to announce the slate of candidates to be elected to the Board of Directors.
Thanks, Larry. According to Section 3.6 of the Audubon Society of Rhode Island bylaws, the Board of Directors shall establish a Governance Committee. The Governance Committee shall present a slate of board members for election by the general membership at the annual meeting. The bylaws also say that board members are elected to a 3-year term and are limited to serving 3 such terms. The Governance Committee has placed the following names in nomination for election this year. For election to their first 3-year term are Ivan Colon, Thomas Leasy, Patricia Thompson, and Leslie Samayoa. And note that Leslie was appointed last year to fill the unexpired term of a board member who stepped down. For election to his second 3-year term, we nominate Jamison Chase, and for election to her third 3-year term, we nominate Terry Meyer. In view of our need to conduct this as a virtual meeting without two-way communication with the attendees, all members were sent a ballot in the mail in late September. This is being recorded on Thursday, October 22nd, and as of this date, 120 ballots have been returned, which comprises a quorum. The above slate of candidates is approved with 118 affirmative votes. Thank you.
Thanks, Don, and welcome our new board members. Audubon doesn't work in the vacuum. We work with many partners with other organizations because together we can be even more strong and effective reaching our mutual goals. Audubon's strategic plan has 4 major goals, which include stepping up our efforts regarding climate change and diversity in the environmental work. This entails both work within the organization as well as out in the community. I've invited Charles Clarkson, the coordinator of the Rhode Island Breeding Bird Survey, Kate Sayles, the Agriculture and Forestry Program Manager with the Northern Rhode Island Conservation District, to talk about the climate crisis and the impacts on birds and habitat, and how Audubon might explore model science-based climate resilience methods on our preserves and share lessons and models from our preserves to show how climate change and impact solutions to others. I'll start with Charles Clarkson, PhD. Dr. Clarkson, could you please comment about the surprising decline in bird populations since 1970?
The biggest surprise is the fact that some of the most common species that we encounter are also in decline. So we typically hear the same stories about grassland birds in decline due to loss of habitats, and we don't think beyond the rarer species in terms of declining species. But this study, which illuminated the fact that analysis of all of these long-term surveys that had been performed in our country to include the breeding bird surveys, aerial surveys for waterfowl, shorebird surveys, and the Christmas bird count data sets going all the way back to 1970 show us a very pronounced decline in about almost all of the species that call North America home. So we have roughly 3 billion birds that have been lost from our avifauna over that 50-year period, which translates to about 30% of the total. And what's the most surprising about this is that even birds that you and I think of as very common, so blackbirds, Baltimore Orioles are a good example of that. Here in the Northeast, Baltimore Orioles have been in decline at a rate of about 2.4% per year going back to the mid-1960s. Barn swallows are declining at a rate of about 1.4% per year. And so we're just seeing this general overall collapse of all of these foraging guilds. And the big question becomes, what is prompting this massive decline?
Is this decline caused by or exacerbated by climate change?
I do think that it's because of climate change, and you can think of it very simply, all right? Birds have evolved for millions of years, and they are kind of walking that tightrope between life and death at all times because they're operating at their physiological maximum. I refer to birds as metabolic hot rods because they are really working at the apex of metabolism, particularly the smaller species like hummingbirds, which have the highest resting basal metabolism of any known vertebrate. And so these birds are constantly maximizing their overall productivity at the expense of being able to find all of these resources they need. And as the climate changes, these things that they need change too. And so if you think about birds that are wintering in southerly destinations like Central and South America, and then migrating thousands of miles up to southern New England, they're migrating based on the same cues that they always have. And evolutionarily, those are cues of photoperiod. As the daylight starts to grow and you have longer days, they start their migratory routes. And they always try to time their arrival on the breeding grounds for peak activity of insects and fruit, which are the foods that they're going to be using to replenish fuel reserves that were lost during migration, build those nests, go through the mating period, and then lay eggs and hatch out those nestlings and raise those chicks to fledge. So if they're timing all of that with local resources, but we're experiencing warmer and warmer springs here in Rhode Island, those local resources are changing based on the immediate surrounding environment. So for example, an abnormally warm spring here in Rhode Island will cause plants to bloom earlier and insects to become active earlier. And then when these birds arrive, which is generally speaking not that much different than it has always been, they usually will find the tail end of productivity of these resources that they historically were showing up right when that productivity peaks. So they're losing out on a lot of this energy that they require for their overall reproductive success. And we know very well from lots of studies that when this happens, the overall reproductive output in any given breeding season tends to drop in some species that are very intimately tied to these resources. So changing climate very much impacts birds, and you can't really think of any better examples of two things inextricably linked like birds and climate. So climate change even small amounts of climate change can have really dramatic impacts on local breeding birds.
How important is it for Audubon to have science-based management strategy for its land management going forward, with the inevitable change that will come with a changing climate?
It's incredibly important, and it is arguably even more important in a small state like Rhode Island. We have a very high population density. We're surrounded by large amounts of population in our surrounding states. We have a lot of impervious surfaces, but amazingly, for a small, high population density state like Rhode Island, we have a lot of open, forested habitats that are being preserved, largely because of institutions like the Audubon Society. And what we do know about birds is that even though they're faced with this incredible uphill battle, they're capable of acclimating pretty rapidly to the environment around them, should they be given the resources they need to acclimate. And so conserving large tracts of forested habitat and marshes, wetlands, the things that these birds need to breed successfully, to fuel for pre-migratory flights, that becomes inordinately important in a world where things are changing rapidly and these birds need to change alongside them. So by conserving parcels of land and then monitoring those parcels of land from a scientific perspective to understand what the overall insect abundance is, the capabilities of these habitat parcels to meet those demands that these birds require, that all becomes incredibly important. And it is something that science is going to enable us to do, which is answer a lot of these difficult questions, because you can do things like model the habitats that these birds are associated with, the resources that they rely on for successful breeding and such. So science-based management and overall adaptive management becomes more and more important in a world where things are changing at a very high rate.
How important are citizen science projects like the Bird Atlas or other research and monitoring projects in helping us to adapt to climate change?
Volunteers are very useful, because it's amazing how volunteer collected data can help to answer some very simple but difficult to answer questions. A lot of the times what we face with our limitations in science is just the capacity to collect enough data. And so having volunteers out collecting the data is really inordinately important for a number of reasons. One, it is arguably the strongest tool we have in our tool belt to understand how we can better conserve our bird populations here in Rhode Island, because the Bird Atlas is a great example of that. Through all of the data that have been collected from our 140 plus volunteers, we have been able to really get a great idea of what birds breeding in Rhode Island require in terms of overall habitat resources, food resources, and then we can take that information, model it to see where birds are occurring in our state based on habitats that meet their needs, and then target our conservation in those areas. And that's really all data that have been collected by citizen scientists. So volunteer collected data is really important in terms of gaining a large amount of data in a relatively short period of time. And the second really important thing is that you give all of these people who have a vested interest in this resource power. You know, we have a lot of birders in the state. We have a lot of people who put up bird feeders in their backyard, and engaging them in these big scientific projects like the Bird Atlas allows them to become more knowledgeable about what they can do in their neighborhood to better meet the needs of birds. We also give them scientific power in that they can start to take part in some of the analyses that we're running and understand the output a little bit more because they're out there collecting the data. And so citizen scientists have become really kind of the mainstay for large climate level, habitat, ecosystem level questions that we have in science, because they can go out and collect a tremendous amount of data, and they are doing it as volunteers who are passionate about what they're doing. So it really is a win-win, and when you have large amounts of citizen scientists engaged.
Next, please welcome Kate Sayles. Kate, can you introduce us to the Rhode Island Wood Partnership? What's the group's mission, and who is represented?
So the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership is a collaboration among our state's natural resources professionals, nonprofits, landowners, conservationists, all stakeholders who are interested and involved in thinking about Rhode Island's forests and advancing conservation throughout the state.
Can you give us a quick review of the history of Rhode Island's forests?
Our current forests are a second growth forest. We're currently at about 56% forested in the state. Our most common forests are oak hickory, even though our state tree is, and our most common tree is the red maple. We've undergone a lot of change since Rhode Island was first colonized. When colonization happened in the 1600s, we were about 95% forested, with large swaths of open forests where our indigenous populations had used fire to control the underbrush and had left large open areas for hunting and for agriculture. So from the 1600s to the late 1700s, we cleared about, we only had about 30% forest left. And then with the advent of the sawmill into the late 1800s, we were at our lowest amount of forests. At the same time, we were high grading and taking all of the good wood for production. We had abandoned a lot of the agricultural land that we had originally converted. So from about the late 1800s, our forests have rebounded in the second growth to where they are today. 68% of our forests are privately owned. So while we're 56% forested, and we do have a lot of forests in the state, most of that is broken up into smaller woodlots owned by private landowners. And our current biggest threat to forests are permanent conversion through fragmentation, and that specifically affects bird populations in the areas that we consider core, or those larger forested blocks of over 250 acres, where our forest interior birds use those areas as they migrate. So a study recently has been done by URI forest scientist Bill Buffum, and it shows that between 2011 and 2018, we've lost about 2,000 acres to permanent conversion. So in the past, we saw our lands cleared and then rebound, but as development is happening, we're seeing our lands fragmented in a permanent way. It's not agriculture, you know, it's buildings, it's developments, and it's renewable energy in some cases. So yeah, lots of different permanent conversion happening.
As we respond to climate change, forests play an important role in mitigating climate emissions. They're also prime sites for development of all types. What could the state be doing to balance these two needs?
So this is one of our most contentious topics in the forestry world, and there's absolutely no question that as we are approaching the future and climate change as it is happening, we need both renewable energy development and we need forest conservation. And those need to be balanced, and they're not mutually exclusive. We shouldn't look at one without looking at the other. The first thing that we can do is try to work together across the aisle between renewable energy and the forestry community. And the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership is currently working on doing that. So reaching out with our energy sector in Rhode Island government, the Office of Energy Resources, working with DEM to try to come up with some thoughts and some actions that we can take to work together. There are many incentives for renewable energy development, like grant programs, some tax exemptions, and other programs. And it would be an important first step to sort of look at our statutes and figure out how we can incentivize the development of renewable energy on previously disturbed sites. So places like landfills or parking lots. And the recent Synapse Energy Economics study that came out in August shows that there is a lot of potential for renewable energy development on previously disturbed sites, somewhere between 3,000 and 7,000 megawatts. So really there is a good first step to looking at those options. We should also look at what other New England states are doing. Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts have all really looked at how they develop renewable energy towards putting it on those previously disturbed sites. We should be using habitat maps and thinking about our most vulnerable habitats for our wildlife and our core forest land of those larger acreages. And we should incentivize moving energy development out of those areas. And we should really start including forests in the conversation about climate change. because it's less expensive to preserve forests, which we know are good at storing carbon as well as sequestering carbon, just by leaving them and managing them as they are, and including that with energy development to really have a full comprehensive plan moving forward as we mitigate climate change.
Can you tell us a little bit about the program Forestry for the Birds that Audubon does in partnership with NRCS, and what value Audubon brings to this program and other programs?
Audubon Vermont's initial Forestry for the Birds program, which looks at birds that utilize the forest, how to manage best for those birds, and how to have a robust outreach strategy to include landowners who wouldn't typically consider managing their forests into understanding forest management for those birds specifically. So Audubon is a strong partner with the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership on this. Through the initial phases of our project, we met with Audubon and several other ornithologists from URI, from the Bird Atlas 2.0, including Charles Clarkson, Peter Payton, Scott McWilliams, and a lot of forest stakeholders. And we looked at what birds are having issues and are losing habitat or aren't as prevalent as they were in the past. And we look specifically at the birds that utilize interior forest habitats. So those are the core blocks, again, of 250 acres or more. We wanted to find 12 birds and have them be our spokesbirds or our birders dozen, birds that are compromised but also easily identifiable, so they wouldn't be impossible to see in the woods if you were looking for them. And we chose our 12 spokesbirds, including, the scarlet tanager, wood thrush, all birds that are charismatic in some way. And we worked with our foresters to come up with some habitat recommendations and forest practices that by implementing those benefit not only our 12 spokesbirds, but other birds that utilize those habitat types. So really by identifying those birds in the field, implementing habitat strategies through forest management, you won't only improve those habitats for those 12 birds, you'll improve habitats for a myriad of birds. So through Forestry for the Birds, we also are implementing 3 demonstration sites across the state where Audubon has come out and done a survey. We've identified birds and habitat types. We've managed for those birds. And then we hope to show landowners and natural resource professionals those demonstration sites in the future. We were going to do it this year, but obviously COVID-19 kind of threw a wrench into that whole project. So we plan on doing that next year. So if folks are interested, please look up Forestry for the Birds and we can point you in the right direction. We are also working with Audubon to have landowners receive Audubon surveys for birds on their property and then incorporate management recommendations into their forest management plans through a program called the Southern New England Heritage Forest, which is a regional conservation partnership with the Last Green Valley in Connecticut and with MassCon in Massachusetts. It falls within that region of where the 3 states touch, and if you look at a night map, it's the last dark area in southern New England, showing an unfragmented block of forest. So, we are really encouraging landowners who wouldn't traditionally be interested in forest management, but are interested in birds to consider getting some of those forest management plans.
On the environmental, climate justice, diversity, inclusion topic, I've invited Leah Bamberger, Director of Sustainability for the City of Providence, and Priscilla de la Cruz, Rhode Island Director of Green Energy Consumers Alliance, and she's the President of the Environmental Council of Rhode Island. They're here to talk about climate change on the urban front and its impacts on vulnerable human populations, as well as why diversity of people in the environmental movement is so important. Leah, can you introduce yourself and the Office of Sustainability and tell us briefly about the Climate Justice Plan?
My name's Leah Bamberger. I am the Director of Sustainability for the Office of Sustainability. Been with the city for just over 5 years now. And the Climate Justice Plan emerged out of or after years of work of trying to shift our focus in the Office of Sustainability and to do a better job of centering social and racial equity in our work. Equity is a pillar, one of 3 pillars of sustainability, but it often is not addressed or focused on as much as the economy or environmental side of things. And so when I started with the city and talking to partners and just getting to know the Providence landscape, it became pretty clear that we needed to really focus on this issue. And we launched the Equity and Sustainability Initiative, which helped us create a partnership with frontline communities in Providence. So these are folks who are really on the front lines of climate change. So they are our low-income communities of color who are bearing a disproportionate burden of the impacts and the causes of climate change. So we created the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee, which is a group of frontline community members that are supported through various grants to help advise us and serve as our collaborative partner and really an accountability source for our work to center racial equity in the city's sustainability work. That process helped set the sort of groundwork for doing a climate plan that really centered racial equity, and that ended up being our climate justice plan, which was released last fall in 2019.
Why is it critical to consider our response to climate change and other environmental issues through an equity lens?
So as I mentioned, equity is a really important part of sustainability. We absolutely cannot have sustainable communities if people are continually marginalized and disenfranchised from the work and from society, right? Social equity is, it's an important piece of our social fabric, right? When we have gross inequalities like we do now, it really strains at society, it strains at our environment. People are part of our environment, right? And we need to be thinking about how all people are affected by our environmental burdens and challenges. And currently, there is a disproportionate impact in low-income communities of color. No matter where you go, what city, what country, anywhere on this planet right now, low-income communities of color are disproportionately burdened by the fossil fuel industry, by chemical companies, by landfills, waste management, water quality issues, lack of access to open space. All of these issues show up, and they're also disproportionately burdened by the impacts of climate change, whether it's wildfires or hurricanes, sea level rise. We're seeing that these communities are on the front line of climate change. And so they need to be a part of the solution. We need to address these root problems, these root causes of climate change, of other environmental issues in order to really address the issues themselves. So I like to use the example, and our climate justice plan talks about in Providence, we're right down the river from one of the first water-powered mills in the world, and that launched the Industrial Revolution, right? And the Industrial Revolution, and particularly, Rhode Island's role in it, we were spinning cotton, right? This cotton was extracted using slave labor from the South, and it's part of this whole globalization and trade of goods and labor. And the extraction of people and labor is just connected to the extraction of resources and the degradation of our planet. So all these issues are really intrinsically connected.
Audubon is over 100 years old, and mostly we're a white organization. What do you suggest we do now, this year, to reframe our organization, add strength to the work you and others are doing around climate justice?
I would point to what's known as the 4 I's of oppression, and they are internalized oppression or individual oppression, institutional oppression, ideological oppression, and interpersonal. The idea is that we need to be addressing oppression at all of these levels, on an individual, and interpersonal, and institutional, and an ideological. And so I think within an organization like the Audubon, there's lots of different ways to be moving on all those levels. So there's definitely personal work that everyone in an organization has to commit to doing. There's interpersonal work that has to happen between individuals within the organization and people who aren't in the organization who have been marginalized and disenfranchised. And then there's, of course, the institutional work. How can Audubon think about ways as an organization it can be more inclusive, how it might need to reflect on its mission or its programs, or all those different ways that that racism is institutionalized in organizations. And so kind of looking at it from all those perspectives, I think there's many, many ways. So there's trainings, but I think the point is that it really needs to happen at all of those levels.
When we talked earlier, you mentioned we need to strike a balance between the sense of urgency to do something with more attention to inclusivity and decision-making. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I often get this question because when I talk about the climate justice plan, I talk about the long process that we went to and the years that we spent building relationships and doing kind of foundational work around racial equity before we even started talking about carbon emissions and greenhouse gases and climate change. And there's often a sentiment in the environmental community is like, well, we don't have time for this. The climate crisis, this is now. Like we're already behind the ball. We can't slow down. And that urgency, I think, is really, it can be problematic. And I think we have to reflect on like, who is this issue most urgent for? And where is that sense of urgency coming from? For me, as a white woman within a, relatively, middle to upper class income bracket, I will most likely be fine regardless of climate change, right? I might lose some of my favorite places that I like to go and enjoy nature, and that will be really, really devastating. But largely speaking, my life, my livelihood is not going to be devastated. But that's not the case for our frontline communities. They are dealing with these issues today, yesterday, they've been dealing with them. And their perspectives are really, really important. And we really need them at the table to make sure that we are solving the root causes of these problems and we're not leaving people behind and we're not creating new challenges. When we don't have their perspective at the table, we run the risk of creating unintended consequences or just kind of pushing the problem elsewhere. So it's not our problem anymore and we don't have to deal with it, but other people or other resources or other places and communities are feeling an impact still. So we really need those voices at the table so it isn't centered on our own experiences and our own perspectives and our own concerns related to the issue, because that's not the total perspective of or the sort of totality of the challenges themselves.
Priscilla, what is the Environmental Council of Rhode Island, and what's its history and its current role and purpose?
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak. And as you mentioned, I'm the president of the Environment Council of Rhode Island. The other hat that I wear, and really my day job, is with Green Energy Consumers Alliance as a Rhode Island director. So today I'm going to focus on our take on these questions from the Environment Council of Rhode Island's perspective. So the Environment Council of Rhode Island, we serve as the umbrella organization for over 60 nonprofits in Rhode Island. And also we have individual members that are part of the Environment Council of Rhode Island. And we have a long history going back to 1972. And the purpose of the Environment Council is really serving as a unified, effective voice for developing and advocating for policies that we know are going to protect and enhance our local environment here in Rhode Island. So we do this in two ways. One very direct way in terms of influencing policy that will get us to achieving that mission. And the role is really, as a coalition and providing that unified message. And then separately, we also do have the Environment Council's Education Fund, where we look at ways in which we can educate Rhode Islanders, and in particular the youth, around environmental issues.
What's the Environment Council's top priorities for the next couple of years, and why have they been selected?
So I'll start with what we see are current priorities as of today. So the Environment Council of Rhode Island works with its members to present a legislative agenda. And we do that every year. So we started off our year in that very same way, pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, where we introduced our emerging legislative priorities. And we focused on different issues under energy and climate. We look at issues around funding and investment that pertain to the environment, but also that have to do with waste, water, toxics. And we really try as an environmental community to present what our priorities are. We focus on highlighting one priority and really having one top legislative item that we thought was critical for the legislature to adopt, and that is the Act on Climate bill. And what that bill does is that it amends the Resilient Rhode Island Act and really focuses on making the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for Rhode Island binding. So we believe that this bill going into 2021 will continue to be one of our top priorities, but we're also looking at, what are other bills that can really advance climate action? When we look at our targets around 100% renewable energy, when we look at strengthening energy efficiency, and when we also look at what is it going to take to really prevent new fossil fuel infrastructure and siting and the burning of waste. So in that respect, we have clarity. But where I think it's a work in progress is that we're really looking at how do we add to our mission a people and equity center approach. We acknowledge that that could really shift the way in which we focus and select our priorities.
We're facing a climate crisis, and Audubon is a member of the Council. What can our members do to strengthen the Council's work on climate justice?
That's a great question. I think a number of things. So working with members like the Audubon Society and other members of the Environment Council of Rhode Island, including the Nature Conservancy, Save the Bay, Clean Water Action, and also my organization, Green Energy Consumers, and many other groups that are really active in climate mobilization work, like Climate Action Rhode Island. We've been working on a climate crisis campaign, and that campaign launched last year with the goal of calling on the administration and also the General Assembly to enact climate action policies, and specifically a policy like the Act on Climate bill that would set binding targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we're calling for immediate action on climate, and we're also calling for an equitable and just transition, really making sure that we're not leaving anyone behind and acknowledging that there are communities that are disproportionately affected by climate change and that are carrying that burden, and specifically those are frontline communities, and that includes Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities, and also low-income communities. So what does climate action look like when you're centering voices that have been marginalized through our history and really left out of the more mainstream environmental movement, and acknowledging that, and also thinking about what is the balanced approach for protecting the very Rhode Island that we love. And taking a step back, we absolutely understand that the public health crisis comes first, and we applaud the state for its leadership in really, dealing with the pandemic. And what we're looking for is, we know that we can address these challenges with urgency. So let's do that also when it comes to climate crisis, because Rhode Islanders, including Audubon members and folks like you and I, and folks that are really dealing with this day to day in frontline communities, know that we have a crisis. And what happens when crises are coinciding when it comes to the climate crisis, racial crisis, and now the COVID pandemic. So we need aggressive leadership all around if we're going to build a stronger and more equitable Rhode Island. So I asked Audubon members to engage with the climate crisis campaign. And we also, actually, a third action item that I will add, I think when it comes to really ensuring that the Environment Council of Rhode Island and our respective organizations are really doing the work around equity, we have to ask ourselves, what are concrete things that we can do to dismantle systemic racism within our own structures and institutions? Because if we can really center that approach, not only internally are we going to be able to embed equity and justice, but also the work that we do will be reflective of that.
A special thank to our speakers, Charles, Kate, Leah, and Priscilla. Your work is so important, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to our members. Since Audubon's founding in 1897, our organization has grown and evolved and adapted to change. We've moved forward and faced many challenges with a solid focus on our core mission of protecting birds, other wildlife, and their habitats through conservation, education, and advocacy. That focus will never change. This past year, we all have faced enormous unexpected challenges, and Audubon has adapted once more. Our staff has been remarkable in their swift response to the pandemic. They created numerous online and virtual education resources. They committed to keeping the trails open for the public use when a connection to nature was needed most, and they kept open communication with our members and supporters regarding our ongoing work. Once again, we have proven our resiliency and our commitment to the Rhode Island community. In the midst of this pandemic, we have also developed a new strategic plan, following 57 interviews with community leaders. Many of those interviews stress the urgency of climate change. The changing climate is having a dramatic impact on wildlife and their habitats. A study published this year reported that since 1970s, nearly 1 in every 3 birds is gone, and even many common species like sparrows and blackbirds are in decline. Changes in habitat, food webs, and species interaction have resulted from climate change, and birds are not able to adapt quickly enough to keep up. Climate change is also responsible for extreme and more frequent flooding, heat waves, fires in the West, damage from extreme storms, and health hazards from pollution. We understand that it will get worse without action. In response to all these threats, all 4 of the major goals of our new strategic plan address climate change. 1, to protect birds and their habitats to support species survival and adaptation through climate changes. 2, to mobilize people from all backgrounds to take action on climate change. 3, to advocate for local and state government to rapidly invest in climate change responses. And finally, to transform Audubon into a more inclusive climate action organization. The first goal will focus on using science to properly manage Audubon properties to support birds as they adapt to changing conditions. We will share what we learn with other landowners in the state, encouraging partnerships as we move forward with new conservation strategies. A second major focus of the strategic plan is inclusiveness. We want to ensure that Audubon reflects all the people of Rhode Island, on our staff and board, in the visitors to our refuges, in our membership, and in advocates, and those we engage in programs and activities. We are looking to engage our future supporters and leaders as we face the challenges of climate change. To accomplish this, we will place an increased emphasis on developing programs and partnerships in communities of color. Audubon has had success in its initial efforts with schools and summer programs for youth, and our recent work with the Providence Stormwater Innovation Center at Rhode Park. But much more work still needs to be done to engage diverse people and communities in the state. The third strategic goal builds on the first 2. We need strong advocacy to push for an urgent focus on climate. We need to hold our regulatory and legislative leadership accountable for implementing a plan that supports the state climate goals. One way to do this is to emphasize the human health implications of the changing climate, advocating for more green space, clean water and air, and making our communities more resilient will improve our health and that of the environment. The final goal in the strategic plan directs Audubon to transform itself into an inclusive climate action organization. We will develop programs, partnerships, and initiatives that bring Audubon to the forefront of the movement to address climate change. We aim to become a recognized leader in Rhode Island's move for climate resilience. The financial implications of the strategic plan are great, but the recently completed capital campaign will enable us to begin tackling many of these initiatives with confidence. We've got the energy, the resources, and the will to move forward. With your support, we're in a good position to confidently take on the challenges ahead. Finally, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us on this virtual annual meeting. I can only hope that next year we can meet again in person and celebrate the 124th Audubon annual meeting. Thank you.